And welcome to another episode of Strange Planet. Thanks for sticking me in your ear. I just watched the most fascinating documentary that was produced for the BBC about exorcisms. And one particular exorcist, a Padre from Argentina, Padre Manuel, who turns out to be a very controversial figure. We're about to learn more about him and the whole practice of exorcism with Andrew Gold. Andrew's a journalist, documentary maker, and a podcast host of a terrific podcast called On the Edge with Andrew Gold. He speaks 5 languages and documents the world's strangest and most controversial people, from true crime and paranormal to science and politics. Hey, Andrew, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. It's good to hear your voice. Can I just ask, is that what your intro, is that you? It's not you, is it? Is it that famous trailer guy?
Not the famous trailer guy, but just yes, he's a hired hand who has a much better voice than I do, and not me.
What a voice! You got a lovely voice as well. It sounds quite exotic to me.
Well, yes, we're in the old colony, right? Canada.
That's right.
Tell my listeners a little bit about On the Edge.
Sure. On the Edge with Andrew Gold is, well, I was going to call it On the Fringe initially because it's about fringe stuff. So it's very similar in that sense to yours. Lots of interviews and episodes with strange, weird people who you might not encounter every day. I didn't go with the word fringe in the end because I thought that people that I invite onto the show might find it offensive. They might be offended by being considered a fringe personality because it can have a negative connotation. So edge I thought was better because people like being edgy. So it can be, psychopaths and narcissists and people like that I'll have on the show. I love doing them. Quite famous faces like Amanda Knox and some British celebrities that I don't know how famous they are in Canada, but Richard Dawkins, for example, and then lots about cults and ideologies. Sometimes it gets a bit political as well, about both sides. So that's really what it is. 3 times a week, me interviewing people.
And a cannibal thrown in for good measure?
Man, well, cannibal, he used a different word and I can't remember what it is. But because he was forced to eat people rather than chose to, I think he said that cannibal, again, it means a culture of eating people, whereas he was one of those people, and I'm sure your listeners will be aware of that story of the Uruguayan plane crash. It was a rugby team. People often think it's a soccer or football team, but it was a rugby team, and they had they'd never seen snow before. That's the thing that I didn't even realize about it. So they were just in like their t-shirts and stuff on a plane from Uruguay to Chile, and they crashed in the Andes on the border of Argentina and Chile. And they were ages away from anywhere else. It was the middle of winter, blizzards and stuff. And they're in like socks and t-shirts, and they had to survive for, I think it was something like 71 days. I can't remember exactly. And obviously a lot of people died in the crash and their bodies were eaten because it was the only thing there. They also couldn't drink because you can't drink the snow because you get frostbite in your mouth. So you have to put the snow in these wine bottles that they had and melt the wine bottles in the snow, but it was like minus whatever degrees. So it took all day for one drop to melt, and they would just sort of share that drop between them all. So it was hell, on Earth. But he survived, the guy I spoke to.
So you've produced documentaries for BBC, HBO. Why podcasting?
Well, I suppose it's a little bit political, but it's just what happened, and I don't have a particularly strong opinion about why it is, but it's just what happened, which was that while I was after the Exorcism film for the BBC, and I didn't make that with them. I made it first because they weren't interested initially in any of my ideas, and then I went and made it with a friend of mine called David, who's a great director, and he films really beautifully. And I was living in Argentina at the time. That's where this Padre Manuel, the Exorcist. And we sold it to the BBC afterwards. It took about 2 years of badgering them to sell it. And after that, I had many, many meetings with them and with different production companies around the UK. And they said, look, we love your ideas. It was all about weird, strange things around the world. Again, like your podcast kind of thing. But they didn't want a white man to be on the screen. This was right at a time when I suppose some of the critical race theory ideas were, being spread in society. And I at first sort of understood that as like, okay, well, here I am, I'll make a sacrifice for the team. And I felt quite, that was a selfish thing. Like I felt I could, I told everyone like, hey, I'm doing this, but I'm making a sacrifice. I thought I was a great guy. But after a few years, I found it very frustrating and woe is me. And I was very upset and angry. And so I thought, look, I've got all these people I want to talk to, got all these interviewees and stuff lined up for documentaries. I'm not going to be able to make them, but I can just sit at home and pop a camera on and have the same conversations I would have had for a documentary that takes, 3 months or a year to make, and do it in an hour and get it out to people. And luckily it's sort of taken off, I suppose.
It has really taken off. So let's talk about The Battle for Young Minds. This is the documentary you produced for the BBC, or not for the BBC, but they later purchased it. And tell us about how you first encountered Padre Manuel Acuña.
Yeah, Manuel Acuña. So Manuel, I was living in Argentina. I had, as you mentioned at the beginning, and I can't go 5 minutes without showing off about it, is that I learned some languages. And I think if you learn a language, you don't often get a chance to show off about it. You don't often get a chance to use it. So you have to just tell everyone you meet that you've learned the languages because, you put so much work into it, I suppose.
5 of them.
So... So I guess I'd lived in France and places in Colombia, and then I moved to Argentina, and I thought, what's here for me to make something journalistic? And I kept seeing on TV, whenever I turned the TV on there, or whenever I was in a taxi and listening to the radio, I kept hearing the voice of Padre Manuel, and he would be telling people, make sure for this Halloween that you have a pumpkin and some olive oil on your head, or just mad things, often involving kitchen ingredients. And that will stop you from getting breast cancer or whatever it might be, or it will ward off demons and those kinds of things. So I thought this is quite interesting because for a documentary, obviously there's the aesthetic of, an exorcism. It's pretty, outrageous. So that's cool. But you always look for something that's also quite profound. And I figured, okay, well, who are these people getting the exorcisms? What can we find out about them? What kind of mental illnesses might they suffer from? And then is this exorcist, I don't believe in the paranormal myself, although I'm very open to people being open to it. But is he a fraud, or is he someone who believes in his powers? So eventually I got in touch with him and I said, I'd love to make a film with you. Can I come and follow you around for a few months? And he agreed because he was very excited. I mentioned the name of the BBC, of course, despite not having any guarantees. I just said, and I explained that to him as well, and he was just very excited and thought we would go and show off his church.
So you, the first exorcism that's featured in the documentary is, I believe her name is Natalia. This is a poor suburb of Buenos Aires, and tell us about, kind of walk us through what that was like, witnessing and even participating in this exorcism of Natalia.
Yeah, that was difficult. I'd seen a lot of that stuff, and again, I'm sure a lot of listeners will relate to this. You watch a lot of weird stuff from different places, and there's that sort of exoticism. There's a distance, and so you often watch. If you see something about exorcism, it tends to be a Vice, as in Vice Media. It tends to be one of their videos. Something crazy in Mexico. It's an old lady, and you don't mean to, but you sort of dehumanize the person to an extent. You forget they're real, so it's funny. And you watch it and you don't understand the language, maybe there's subtitles, who knows? And you're just like, God, look at these ridiculous people who believe ridiculous things. When you're there, you've already met Natalia off camera, and you've had a nice chat with her. And she's somebody who's suffering badly with what she calls intrusive thoughts and, things that we might, analyze and believe are like obsessive compulsive disorder, schizophrenia. I wouldn't exactly know, but we would send her to a psychiatrist perhaps, or a psychologist, and see what to do with her. She had no other recourse. She had nowhere else to go except to this exorcist. And then you see her beneath, I saw her beneath my feet, and I'm ringing the bells because I wanted to participate. And all I could think at that moment, we've got the cameras on me and she's just screaming and screaming. All I could think was how inappropriate it was that I was just like, while this woman was in so much pain and in such a vulnerable moment, that I was just standing over her head ringing a bell like an idiot. Because part of taking part in that, I suppose, is mocking a little bit. Like, I'm doing this silly thing because I'm mocking. and I felt really bad. And so from that moment, we decided, okay, I'm not going to take part in any more of these exorcisms. I'm just going to watch from the sidelines and sort of ask, have you considered going to a psychologist or something like that? So yeah, it was difficult and weird and strange.
Initially, you had some casual conversations with Padre Acuña, and he was open to talking to you. And what were your initial impressions of him? Because I know at one point he stated that he believed in vampires. What else did you glean from your conversations with Padre Acuña?
Well, there's this sort of, unfair prejudices I had, I suppose, because there's like the physiognomy of a person's face, and he has this sort of weaselly face, big cheeks and stuff, and he just looked villainous to me. And I tried to discount that because that's unfair. He was clearly really invested in his look. He had a big marketing team and a YouTube team and all those kinds of things. He relied heavily on the propaganda and marketing from the film The Exorcist. He played the music from it at his masses, the Tubular Bells theme. He had posters from the movie with his face superimposed over that of The Exorcist. So this was clearly somebody, in my mind, who was vain, pompous, and potentially abusive. But like I say, you don't want to go into a film or documentary with those kinds of biases. So I tried as much as possible to forget that and get to meet this guy. With regards to the stuff about vampires and all of that I suppose was my tongue-in-cheek stuff. I grew up watching Louis Theroux, who's a popular British documentary maker, sort of maybe our Michael Moore to an extent, but he's not as political. But he very subtly mocks the people he's talking to, if they seem like evil people, And I suppose that was me doing that. And maybe it's something I wouldn't do now, because if I made a new film now, I might not do that now. I'd feel a bit bad about it. I'm not sure. But that was my way of just seeing how far I could push him. Was there anything he didn't believe in? I'm all for belief in different things. That's fantastic and interesting, and it makes the world interesting. There's plurality of thought and opinion. But then I'm like, okay, so vampires? Yeah, we've seen those. And I just felt like anything I said, he had to sort of play to the gallery and say that he's seen levitation, he's seen heads turn green, he's seen them spin round, all sorts of mad, crazy things. And he was so confident. And I thought, okay, but he's telling me this, and we're going to watch some of these exorcisms in real life, and what if they don't work? But they always work, and he knows that, so he's very confident.
So tell me about his. How do we refer to these people? Clients that come to see him?
I think so. Yeah.
In the documentary, they're all sort of young, impressionable teenage girls. Did you see any clients that weren't young teenage girls?
No. Except in the big mass that he has a big one every month where they are playing the music, and that was where, like, at the end he ends up screaming at me at one of his masses. But he has, I think I'm right in saying 10,000 or so people there. It might just be in the thousands, but the roads outside, the streets are closed off. There are just people, and they're just falling over themselves. So that's where you do get men, women, children. Every now and then it's like you turn around, oh, there's another one, and they're on the floor convulsing, and someone will come over and spray them with some holy water and they'll get better. And so they're sort of almost mini exorcisms, these little moments that happen in the crowd. But in terms of the big exorcisms, which is like people coming in and saying, I have a problem, this is related to pushes and urges I'm getting and all sorts of things that a demon is doing to me. The three women that I was sort of looking into were all young women. And my impression is that he mostly deals with young women. And I went and asked the psychiatrist of one of the women, who is now his assistant. Her name is Paula. And he did a big exorcism on her. And then she left her family and has stayed with him, sleeps upstairs in the church with him, goes on holidays with him. I went to see her former psychiatrist, and he said that people are always getting, young women are always getting sort of stolen by exorcists and shamans and other kinds of magic people. And it's a particularly vulnerable stage, adolescence, and apparently particularly for women. I don't know how accurate that really is. Anecdotally, it sounds about right to me. That might be a societal thing more than a biological thing. That might be about the pressures put on women, young women in particular, more than men. I'm not sure. But that seems to be it. And it's like a quick fix. This idea that, okay, psychiatry might be very expensive and very long, and 5, 10, 20 years, you might never see results. I mean, a lot of us have had experiences with therapists and psychiatrists, and they're not foolproof. Whereas this is a guy saying, hey, I can fix you, give me 1 hour and I'll do it. And it's very tempting.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Subscribe at strangeplanetpodcast.com.